Videos like this are made possible by viewers like you. I used to be a Tealer, an avid follower of Teal Swan, and my involvement with the group and belief in Teal Swan's teachings changed my life. And not for the better. In this video, I'm going to tell you the story of how I came to follow Teal and how it changed me. Let's talk about this. Hello and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Andy Fellows and I make videos on cult skepticism and making sense of life after the New Age. If you're interested in a skeptical but honest view of cults and the New Age, then why not subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell thing and make sure you hit all when you hit the bell so you get notified anytime I upload a video. In 2014, I attended Teal Swan's workshop in London. I had several months earlier just got out of a relationship which hadn't ended so brilliantly, and I had no home to speak of and about 20 quid to my name. My ticket to the workshop was paid for generously by fellow Tealers, and while I was in London, I was sleeping on floors kindly offered to me by friends I'd made in the group. Now, by then, Teal Swan's teachings had become a really big part of my life and had really begun to influence the way that I was interfacing with everything that I was experiencing. In the relatively short amount of time that I was a Tealer, the relatively short amount of time that I was following Teal for, my life was turned upside down and my mental health gradually deteriorated. I would regularly practice something that Teal recommended often, which I now believe to be pseudo-therapy, called shadow work. To get an idea of how all this happened, we need some context here. To understand the person I would eventually become, to understand the way that I was thinking at the time and why my life was the way that it was, and to understand the identity that I would take on, we need to go back before it all. We need to go back to 2009, to this lump of offal. Baked like a cake, lying on a caravan sofa at the seaside with their friends. To help you understand the kind of person I was before all of this, let me tell you a little bit about what I was like. So this picture was taken around my birthday in 2009. It was months before I would start studying music at college. At this time of my life, I would say, pretty typical teenager with the obvious quirks that each of us have, you know, given the different experiences we've had up until that point. I was homeschooled for a little while. I was always bullied any school I ever went to, so that obviously had an effect on me. Also bullied by my friends at a point, which is a whole other story. I was a belligerent person, I would say, and that hasn't changed really. I was always quite independent, quite opinionated, and relatively unorthodox. And although some parents of my friends thought I was a bad influence, I would say I was just trying my best with what I knew and what I had at the time, you know. This was me sort of late 2009, sort of early 2010 time. And then as 2010 sort of progressed, dreads came in between my first and second year of college, and music was pretty much my whole life. Music, friends, sort of laying around doing very little. It was that kind of a time in my life. I always was into having a laugh. I was always the kind of person who, you know, I think I always had a lot going on in my head. I was always the kind of person who was working on something in their mind, you know. So the next picture is another birthday, a picture of me celebrating. I use the term loosely, I don't look like I'm celebrating very much. In 2011, me looking into the middle distance and looking pensive. Around the same time as the previous image, this is me in a studio recording some music that my ex and I had written together, which was a birthday gift from my dad. Overall, from these images, I feel like you can kind of see that I'm someone who's very into their music, sort of playful, never really camera shy, although I have, as I say, always been the kind of person who's sort of thinking away and working on something in their head. Though I definitely feel like I was, although never someone who was particularly social, I was definitely more social then. I was more engaged with people and I was more lighthearted, which is something that did change as time went on. I feel like it became harder for me to have a sense of humor as things went on, but we'll get into that. So this picture is from the beginning of 2012. So this was the year that I go through a lot of changes, dropped out of college this year, moved out of my mum's house this year, moved in with my girlfriend. So me dropping out of college wasn't really anything to do with the spiritual stuff or the cult or anything like that. I dropped out of college this year. I moved out of my house, moved out of home with my mum this year. And it was a year of big change for me. And then later in the year, a close friend of mine died. So it was a number of changes that were happening in my life that kind of, in a way, you know, if you look at like what Stephen Hassan's written about cults, he's talked a lot about how when you're going through a change in your life, that's when you're vulnerable to these kinds of things. You're vulnerable to cult recruitment around those kinds of times. And so for me, it was almost like a perfect storm, really, to getting into this kind of thing. It was, whenever I've told this story before, I've always sort of told the story of how, like, a close friend of mine died, and it was this big thing for me. And it was a huge thing for me. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But like, I also would, having sort of looked into this in preparation for making this video and sort of gone back through all my posts on social media and things like that, I've found that, yeah, it was a number of things that happened, and they all happened in quite quick succession. I'd left college, and then I moved into the flat, and out with my mum, moved in with my girlfriend, and then my friend died later in the year. So it was quite a difficult year, I think, overall, in terms of the changes that were happening. So early in 2012, my relationship was good and was playing a lot of music with my girlfriend at the time. We're playing gigs together. Here's a picture from that. I also at the time started reading about Buddhism and Taoism. So this was kind of the beginning of my interest in spirituality for my own sort of, you know, purposes, my own reasons. I was around it growing up because, you know, there's certain people in my family were very sort of spiritually inclined, but I never took it on for myself until sort of the last year of college, really, which was when I started reading about Buddhism and then started to take an interest in Taoism and read like the Tao Te Ching and things like that. So that was when spirituality became more in my life, and over the course of college as well. And anyone who knows me from that time will feel like, yeah, there's a big thing that I've missed out right now in what I've been talking about, because I haven't mentioned the fact that I was increasingly partaking in the inhalation of the fumes of the devil's cabbage. And I'm trying really hard to not have the YouTube's bots demonetize me in phrasing things that way. So please be kind to me, YouTube overlord robots. I'm trying. I was smoking more, I was getting into Buddhism, I was playing music, but the music was the real main thing for me at this point. The music was the thing I was passionate about, I was interested in. But, you know, looking back, I don't really feel like I necessarily had enough sort of a belief in myself or enough knowledge on how things would be in my life to really go for the music thing. I don't feel like I had enough in me to really push for that. So in a way, I think I was looking for something else, a sort of way out, if that makes sense, something that would make more sense to me. And again, I feel like that sort of spiritual seeking led me into the Buddhism and the Taoism, and that sort of not really knowing what was going on in my life or where I was going led me towards that as well, which paved the way for other things happening. So in 2012, I moved in with my girlfriend, and things went well for a while. We were, you know, it was the kind of relationship where we were best friends as well as we were, you know, as well as being together. So we got on really well, and we didn't fall out all that much. But when we moved in together, we did start to fall out more and more. I remember feeling not like I wasn't ready to move out. I remember feeling like I wanted to, but I didn't want to yet. Like I wasn't at that place. And I think, you know, about what I said before about how I was kind of, I didn't feel like I knew where I was going or what I was going to be doing. And I didn't feel like in a weird way, I didn't feel like I could go out and get a job or anything like that. That was always something that I'd struggled with. Even to today, you know, working in a conventional job has never been something that I had in me as something I felt like I could do. And the thought of it immediately just set off depressive episodes for me. So the kind of not feeling ready to move out, not feeling ready to be an adult in quite a profound way. And I don't know that anyone necessarily always feels ready to be an adult. I think when you're a teenager, you might feel like you are, but then when you're an adult, you're like, I wasn't ready for this. But for me at that time, and maybe this is something that you also felt, I definitely didn't feel ready. I didn't feel ready for the responsibility. I didn't feel ready for what was coming next. But my girlfriend was struggling at home at the time, and we'd always talked about moving out together. So I kind of said, well, we've always talked about doing it together, so let's do it together. And so it happened. And I loved the flat and I loved the prospect of it, but I didn't really adjust very well to it. As we'll see as we go on, I struggled more and more with this. So I think by September 2012, I had started to see myself as a spiritual person. I'd already bought into this sort of handful of like conspiracies and conspiracy theories and all that kind of thing. I remember watching like a lot of 9/11 truth stuff before I moved out. So I'd already my mind was primed. The mind soil was ready. It was fertile. It was ready to have the seeds of misinformation scattered. So by this time, cracks had started to form in the relationship, which is, was sort of like, my birthday's in July, so by September, a couple of months into living there, cracks had started to form in the relationship, and that would only get worse as my worldview became more and more detached from reality. Here's a couple of pictures from a family holiday, and yeah, you can see in these pictures, in this one with the owl, I'm definitely nervous about the owl. So that's where that sort of half smile's coming from. But then this picture in particular, like this one, it was taken on the family holiday, and I remember wanting it to be particularly spiritual. I wanted to seem spiritual. I remember coming to this river and seeing that this lovely sort of bridge that was built over the river with these massive rocks, and it's a beautiful thing. And I remember arriving there and being like, it's just a spiritual kind of location, right? It wasn't in such overt terms, and I always was sort of adverse to thinking of certain things as being more or less spiritual, because I had this whole thing about everything is one and blah blah blah, which I think I took from the Taoist sort of point of view. And that was a thread all the way through my spiritual period. But I remember seeing that and being like, this would be perfect for a picture where I look particularly spiritual, kind of a vibe, right? Again, not overtly thinking in those terms, but yeah. At this time, I was really starting to develop an identity around being a spiritual person. I had started to think of myself as a spiritual person. And I think much the same way as anyone would when they sort of come to any kind of religion. And that was what the New Age was for me at the time. It was really a religion. I think that change in the way I saw myself is very normal, relatively normal for people who go through that change, who find a religion, find God, find Jesus. I found the New Age, I found spirituality. I found the New Age a little bit after that. I feel at this point I was very much, it was meditation, it was sort of mindfulness, and that's what I can remember of it now. Obviously, my experience was sort of deeper at the time. I've just remembered some of the highlights. From this point, I'm using spirituality in a way as like a sort of sense of stability, as like a rock in my life, something that I'm clinging to so that I can feel safer, more stable, and like I can make sense of things a little bit. And that's definitely true as things go on and I start to decline mental health wise. But I wouldn't say at this point necessarily, although I might be misremembering, I wouldn't say that my mental health was particularly worse because of the spiritual stuff. I was definitely affected by not being at home anymore and not adjusting very well to that. I know that sort of sounds like minutia maybe, but the reason I'm saying that and the reason I'm sort of laying that part of this out is because it feeds into how things changed for me later. So in October 2012, a close friend of mine died. And so this was a friend of mine. I've actually written about this on my blog. I'll link to that in the description. I wrote that more recently, looking back on this whole thing. It was a friend of mine who I'd become close to throughout college, but I had known her from years before that. We actually went out. We were in a relationship when we were younger. And then we sort of lost contact when we broke up and didn't talk for years. And then we sort of became friends at college when we happened to be on the same course. I've told that whole story on the blog, which I won't go into it too much here, but she died at the end of 2012, October 2012, and that hit me really hard. I didn't know what to do with it. I hadn't really lost anybody before, and I didn't know what to do with the grief. And because I was already using spirituality to sort of cling to a sense of stability in my life, I ended up leaning on it more in that time, which again is something that many people do. May not have been harmful and may not always be harmful for other people as well. But because I had no framework of dealing with the grief, I think that is where things kind of went a little bit. What I did was withdraw, and I smoked more, and I started to watch like conspiracy theory documentaries on YouTube, alternative history stuff on YouTube, like ancient aliens and all that kind of stuff, pseudo-scientific things. I started to lean into the world of possibilities at that point a little bit. Definitely it's true that I became more and more bitter as the sort of baseless misinformation threw a veil over my perspective. And on October the 30th, I posted a picture of a blue sky over a empty street on Facebook. And you look at this picture and you think, it's a beautiful picture, right? It's a beautiful sky, it's sort of a normal street, nice, right? The caption, the way I saw this, was ritualistic destruction, because I'd seen what I thought were chemtrails in the sky, because I'd fallen for the chemtrail conspiracy theory about contrails, and instead of seeing a beautiful day, I saw death. And sort of knee-deep in pseudoscience and consuming sort of ever more elaborate fantasies, which fed on and were fed by this sort of systemic distrust and this feeling I had about, my friend dying and just sort of not feeling very stable and secure in myself, as I wasn't fully, in my mind, ready for sort of the adulting stuff. I sort of consumed every dubious documentary I could find, like everything on YouTube, just everything I could find, I did it. I set the bar very low, and I made no apologies for that. The apologies would come later, unfortunately. When the YouTube algorithm, baby as it was in 2012, began to serve up repeats, I turned to Facebook for some new things to watch. This was the post that started it all for me. On the 13th of November 2012, I posted this to Facebook. Does anyone know of any decent independent documentaries on YouTube? I've done The Pyramids, 9/11, Ancient Knowledge, part 1 through 1.5. I love that I said 1.5. That 0.5 needs to be counted, it's important. And The Kogi Message and Atlantis. I'm interested in anything to do with any unexplained mysteries on the planet, and I'm open-minded. Try me. A friend of mine from college replied, check out videos by these guys, Andy. Pretty interesting. Spirit Science 12, the human history movie. I watched it all. I watched as much on the channel as I could, and my tiny sheltered mind was blown. A little over a week later, I was hardcore pilled on this stuff, and on the 21st of November, I posted this. So we're a month away from phase A in the cycle, or the dawning of the age of Aquarius, the end of the world, to some. Those who can't afford the slightest change to their comfort, or those who have been misinformed. Perhaps you know it as the 2012 shift, or the polar shift, or a surface shift, or just a shift. We're approaching not the end of the world, but the end of this way of being, the end of such an abusive, negative way of living. Abusive not just to each other, but to the planet too, and soon it will be dry of resource. Then what? And then the start of something new, something amazing, provided we all pull together. So just break in a second, I'll read the rest of it in a second, but there's an element of truth to that, and I think with conspiracy theories in general, there is an element of truth to a lot of them. It's usually like a grain of sand in like a bucket of sand, but what do they say? A grain of truth, right? It's like that. I definitely took it to the extreme, and I wasn't alone in this. There were so many people who were talking in this kind of way at this time. But yeah, let me carry on with what I was saying. There are those who are bound by evil and know no love, who wish to take such freedoms away from us, as they believe it not to be our right to such freedoms. We will take them back upon their fall. Have a great month. If I were you, I'd spend it preparing for the shift, dropping the negative weights that hold you back, and begin to be the best you can be, the most brilliant, the most kind, the most compassionate, the most pure. Have a great month, week, day, hour, minute, second, and harness the infinite power of possibility that each moment possesses, and create that bright future for all of us. I mean, I was passionate, right? I was nothing if not passionate. A friend stepped in. Sounds like a cult, mate. So this friend was ever the voice of reason, and I overlooked his opinions. He was too negative for my positive vibes. I couldn't have him bringing me down, right? So I ignored his attempts to dissuade me. And 2 days later, I was doubling down. I posted this on the 23rd of November. The issue we have is very few people have been told about how the world really works. You create your own reality, as everything that happens to you exists in your mind first, before you attach meaning. All you have to do is attach a positive meaning. If only it were that simple, right? A barrage of New Age tropes followed, and from then on my social media presence is a mix of no context, pseudo-scientific or pseudo-intellectual quotes or misquotes, as is often the case, platitudes, uncharacteristically upbeat messages, less than a stone's throw away from love bombing. The 5th of December. Good morning, fellow light beings. How are you today? Everything you learn is a lesson. Take what you can from everything with a pinch of salt. The language of life can be a tricky one to read, so take everything with a pinch of salt. Ask yourself, what can I learn from this? 6th of December. You there, stop moving a second. Drop whatever you're doing. Instead of focusing on what sets us apart, let's take a few moments to celebrate what makes us the same. We're all born into this life a vessel, an empty mind, ready to be filled with experiences. Thus, we are all the same person, just with different life experiences. What else makes us the same? What do you think? Some obviously facile stuff, getting very new agey very quickly. The 8th of December. I love the universe. That means you, winking face emoji. But seriously now. Later that same day, 8th of December, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to an increasingly sick society. Classic quote that you often hear in these circles. Not an unfair quote, not untrue necessarily, but definitely circulated quite passionately in these circles. Let's create a better future. It starts now with mindset. For if you knew how powerful your mind was, you would never have a negative thought. Smile and pass it on. Please don't overlook how quickly this happened, right? I was in a difficult place. I was sent a video. Boom. Matter of days, literally a matter of days, and I was overcome. A week later, I was someone else. I was spouting these platitudes and these thought-stopping cliches, and new age dog whistles abound. It was around this time that I started a project which attempted in no specific way to create a better world, to make the world a better place, and to develop mindset for the future. It was something that I came up with a friend at the time, and I kind of just took it and ran. And I feel like, as I describe it like that, it does sound kind of vacuous, and I think it was. I feel like it could have done with being a little bit more specific, a little bit more action oriented. I was all about mindset's the difference. Mindset's what makes the difference. And it was well-meaning though, ultimately. And also it was around this time I started a YouTube channel. So this is when I actually started making YouTube videos for the first time, like with any real, effort. But those videos are long since removed. So I wish I had them, honestly, so that I could show you them. Because they would have been very interesting to look at. A lot of my focus at this time was around December the 21st, 2012, so the Mayan prediction end of the world stuff. And there was this sort of story in the spirit science circles, which was about this shift that would happen where we would all ascend into the 4th dimension and there would be 3 days of darkness and all that kind of stuff. I think as the 21st of December approached, I started to soften my position in sort of anticipation that it wouldn't be exactly as I hoped it would be. Sort of anticipating the cognitive dissonance, But while I was posting this barrage of nonsense on Facebook in private, I had discovered Teal Swan, or as she was known at the time, Teal Scott, with the name from a previous marriage. That's where things started to change in I would say, sort of take a turn for the worse. So I discovered Teal through a collaboration that she did with Spirit Science, but naturally it's quite hard to pinpoint exactly when that happened, exactly when that crossover occurred, because their channels have both undergone quite a bit of pruning in recent years. So on December the 20th, 2012, the day before this great shift was supposed to happen, I posted this. When tomorrow finally hits, it will be a funny one. Either no one will be right in their predictions, or everyone will be right. I suppose it's based on the current level of vibrational frequency we're resonating at, as a whole, as a collective. And here you can hear Teal's sort of cadence, you can hear Teal's terminology coming through in what I'm saying here. And throughout this post as well, there's this kind of Teal-esque, I'm in on a joke that you're not in on, right? The funniest part will be everyone who insisted nothing will happen starting to play the I told you so game, and everyone who insisted something will happen. This is terribly written, there's typos galore. And everyone who insisting someone will happen will be the ones who will notice a subtle shift in energy, or perhaps a less subtle shift. So I've gone from sort of saying that we're on the cusp of this thing happening to now saying that there will be a subtle shift or perhaps a less subtle shift. So rather than putting the less subtle shift front and center, that's changed now. It's perhaps a less subtle shift, right? I may be doing it as sort of like an underhanded thing, but yeah, it seems like I'm trying sort of preemptive damage control here, right? Whatever happens for you does not mean someone, I think that's supposed to say something amazing didn't happen for someone else. We're all having our own experiences of the collective reality we've created based on the environmental factors that have attributed to our personal mindsets. I think, again, we have attributed. I've not got much better at typing. I've always been a few words ahead of what I'm writing. When I'm writing, I'm like, write shit because I'm thinking about what I want to write next. We're all having our own experiences of the collective reality we've created based on the environmental factors that have attributed to our personal mindsets. We're all having our own experiences of the collective reality we've created based on the environmental factors that have, I think I'm supposed to say, contributed there to our personal mindsets and thus our perspectives. It's all really about perception anyway. Life is just events with meaning attached. Who attaches the meaning? Like, that is the level of condescending I would expect from a new ager. And also, it's not so different from like a Q drop now either. It's like sort of a bunch of statements, a bunch of assertions, and then just a leading question at the end. So, when the Great Ascension didn't occur on the 21st of December in 2012, that didn't deter me. I still carried on with all the spiritual stuff. I mean, that's what we expect. Anyone who knows anything about cognitive dissonance knows. You make a future prediction, that prediction doesn't come true in the way that it was said it was gonna. Later, you just adjust it a little bit or just pretend it did happen in some sort of subtle way. You know, you'll just adjust your perspective around it. And that's basically what I did. Myself and others who believe something was gonna happen on the 21st of December later just says stuff like, something definitely happened. And if you were attuned to it, then you would know that it happened. It's just bullshit, right? Throughout 2013, I took fewer and fewer pictures, but in June, I changed my profile picture to this. So during 2013, I consume as much Teal content as is available. I'm watching videos, I'm listening to interviews, I ordered her book, the only one that was available at the time, The Sculpture in the Sky, and started to take her advice very seriously, and also joined the Facebook group and met my new tribe. This face, by the way, this facial expression is one that will make a comeback. We're going to see this a number of times. It's my, I'm happy, look at me, I'm so spiritual and happy, I promise I'm happy face. And that's not to say that I'm not happy when I'm pulling the face. It's just to say that there's a lot going on underneath the surface. There's a lot of stuff that I needed to resolve and later did. So whenever someone put a camera in front of me, it was harder for me to access almost a genuine smile initially, and then it became like a habit for me that I would, anytime the camera was there, I would pull this face. So yeah, that's a deep analysis of a facial expression that you probably didn't need but got anyway. So I'd started to see things in a very peculiar way throughout 2013. I really got very detached from reality. There's a post from February that year where I'm sort of apologizing for glorifying separateness, which I'll read you in a second, and that accompanied a YouTube video of this with the same subject, which I made at the same time. Dear the people, I apologize for repeatedly forgetting to not glorify separateness. I don't do it intentionally. I occasionally even forget to treasure oneness. And for that, and for all the posts I have made recently which glorify separateness, I am sorry. I am still learning, as you are, as we all are. Everybody makes mistakes. But these mistakes teach us more about ourselves. Life is a learning experience. The only thing that stops us apologizing for our mistakes is our ego's voice in the back of our head saying, "You've done nothing wrong, you don't need to apologize." Then it proceeds to pile technicalities upon technicalities on top of that. And very quickly our minds become a maze. So I am, quite simply, sorry. Which is funny because we're all one anyway, so I'm just apologizing to myself. There's the technicality. In the future, I will do my best to remember to treasure oneness and simplicity above all else. And when this kind of thing began, you can see that there were a lot more interactions on my posts. And as time went on, before I think I got really sort of ingratiated into the Teal Tribe thing and started to get to know people through that, it went from like the people from my life before my whole spiritual thing. At first, they were engaging with me and talking to me. And then over time, gradually less and less, they engaged less and less to the point where like this, it's like a like from one person. And then as I got to know more and more Teal people, more and more people sort of were interacting with my stuff again. But there was really a crossover period where I started to alienate people. I started to say things and do things that people were just like, oh, I can't be bothered. And I guarantee like people started to unfollow me on Facebook at this point. If that was even a function, then like just ignore, just scroll past it, you know, which I don't blame, honestly, because I was fully pilled. Like I was fully into this then. So during 2013, Teal's ideas seeped into everything in my life. Like everything, the way I approached everything, the way I thought about everything, the way I did everything was informed by Teal's videos, the way that Teal said things, what she thought about things and that kind of stuff. And for anyone who's watching this thinking, well, why did you just not do that? Obviously, I've explained where I was mentally at the time. This is not unique to me either, I don't think. This is something that I have seen, and I could be wrong, but this is something that I have seen in others, and it is a strong belief of mine that it is something that does happen when people start to watch Teal videos more and more. The way that they're done, the way that Teal talks, the way that she positions ideas and positions herself as someone who knows a lot of stuff, as someone who has magic powers, basically. It seems that she sets herself up as an authority, as someone who should be listened to, as someone who should be this sort of person that you basically go to for everything in your life. And I fell into that, and that was definitely how I was living for a while. I remember this sort of weird feeling in my chest, it was like a panic sensation, which was sort of twisted up with this strange pain as well. It wasn't like a huge pain, but it was like a weird sort of discomfort, sort of pain. And it was uncomfortable, and it was like a weird sense of anguish. And this feeling, this sensation I had, it only lasted a few seconds, but it was something that happened fairly often after that for quite a long time. And for as long as I was practicing shadow work, it was a regular thing. It was how I felt quite often. And later I came to describe the feeling as like my heart was wounded and felt like it was bleeding, but like emotionally bleeding. It was obviously all psychosomatic. And it was more discomfort than pain. I feel like if I had carried on with shadow work or I'd stayed involved in this more, then that would have been more long lasting and it would have definitely affected me for longer. I think that the closest thing I can connect it to now is when I feel sort of deeply hurt or rejected or sort of quite in pain in some way, that feeling is there then. That's the feeling that happens then. And it's something that I haven't really had much, like a handful of times since getting out of the whole Teal thing, but it was a very prevalent thing while I was there. And I feel like that, although it seems like a small thing perhaps, that is indicative of my overall mental health state as well. That is very much representative of how I was feeling generally. There was a lot of anxiety, there was a lot of depression, there was a lot of rumination and all these kinds of things which became commonplace while I was practicing shadow work and became consistently more while I was doing it. But I didn't know not to. I didn't know to stop. When you're in it, it's difficult to know what is exactly causing it, and because it's positioned as the solution to how you're feeling and to what's going on in your life, it becomes harder and harder to actually do it. I think if I'd carried on with the Teal thing, that feeling probably would have persisted a little bit longer after I'd stopped doing the shadow work, much like anxiety did. And anxiety was something that I dealt with in like a big way for the first time when I was into Teal and following Teal, and her ideas sort of started to affect the way I was dealing with things in my life. So by this time my relationship was getting harder, it was struggling, and it was made more difficult by the fact that I was becoming incredibly obnoxious. I felt like every decision I made, I wanted it to be in alignment with my higher self, right? These are the kind of dog whistles we're talking about. This is the kind of language that was used. And I felt that it was in alignment with my higher self to quit my job as a guitar teacher and sort of focus on my effort to promote this mindset for the future, this little project I mentioned earlier. And sort of the whole thing that it was really was write articles, maintain a Facebook page, and make videos for YouTube, which could have worked if I'd known what I was doing and know more about it, but it didn't work because I didn't know those things. And in a way, I'm glad it didn't work because, I'd probably be in a bit of a different position right now if it had, but I'm glad it didn't do so well at the time. I'm glad I've got that record of how I was on this channel, at least. Obviously, as I say, the old channel, I removed it, but I'm glad I have that record of now how I was, so I can use it to have a conversation with you and show that the way I was before, as I've done in the other videos where I'm reacting to that. By the end of 2013, Teal's ideas had fully taken me over. My mental health had begun to be quite affected in quite a severe way, including but not limited to my depressive spells, which worsened and became monthly. They became more frequent. Like every month I would have these massive depressive episodes, which would last maybe a week or so. Blackout done. Like not useless, just grumpy, sad, miserable, tearful, everything was wrong. I'd never had that before or since, really. I've definitely, I still struggle with depression and stuff, but it was never as bad as it was when I was doing shadow work and when I was listening to what Teal had to say and taking it and applying it in my life. I just feel like it's bad advice. Just my opinion, but I just feel like it's bad advice, and it really had a negative effect on me. Through that, I became really adept at explaining my feelings through these sort of complex stories about my shadows, right? And I repurposed a lot of the painful experiences in my life so that they fit into the narrative which I constructed for myself as a Tealer, which meant creating this story of myself before overcoming these shadows as a villain in some ways, which it's like, so my pre-Teal self almost was a villain. My pre-Teal self was this unaware, unconscious, evil person in a way, and the new me was now conscious and aware, and I knew all my shadows and I knew all these kinds of things, and I was able to overcome them. That was what I had come to. That was what I had felt encouraged to do as a result of listening to what Teal had to say. So there's been a real change already. You can see this real kind of change in my mindset from this somewhat belligerent, opinionated and sort of independent, but ultimately not ready to grow up person that I was when I was a teenager, through college and all of that. The music, by the way, hasn't got a mention because it sort of fell by the wayside. I definitely did a bit of music at one point leading up to the whole Teal thing, but I really played music less and less throughout the Teal thing. It just, again, fell by the wayside. Spirituality became the thing that was most important to me. There is this huge difference between the person I became, or had become by this point, and the person I was before, but it doesn't stop there. It definitely goes on. I also got into the habit of basically psychoanalyzing in Teal's way everybody that was around me. I remember trying to rope my girlfriend into doing some processes, and I remember doing a lot of sort of psychoanalyzing with my girlfriend at the time, and I remember upsetting my mum quite a bit actually by trying to like do shadow work on her, like by trying to psychoanalyze her as well. It wasn't good, and of course my mum being upset meant that it was working, right? Because my perspective, and this is the way that this thing works, right? If you're upset, if it makes you feel bad or it makes you cry or whatever, then it's working. And that's Teal's whole brand, really, isn't it? Is, I'm not gonna tell you the good things. I'm gonna give you the stuff that's hard to hear. Tough love, and progress isn't always pleasant. Growing isn't a nice thing, and we shouldn't try to just be happy all the time. But I feel like what that translates into is being happy none of the time or very little. And that was how that was for me. So my relationship really hit the rocks through all of this, and me trying to get my girlfriend to do the processes that Teal was, sharing in her videos and all these kinds of things, it caused a lot of fights. That did. And out of respect for her, I'm not going to go into all the details here, but suffice to say, Teal's teachings were a big part of why the relationship ended, why we broke up. And I'm not sad it ended anymore. I feel like it was for the best, and it definitely made it so that we could both go off and be in relationships, and I'm incredibly happy now. The way that it ended, the way that I handled that ending, it could have been better, and I kind of wish I'd done better. The end of 2013 and the beginning of 2014 were messy with a lot of ups and downs, and I got close to some fellow Tealers and introduced some people to Teal. From what I know, none of it stuck for the people that I introduced, which I'm glad about. And at that time as well, I did a bit of couch surfing at my family's houses and at a friend's house. Got into a short-lived but not so great relationship, which I think in hindsight, for my part, was far too naive for it to be good. And also, I was far too at my own arse for it to be good. And I don't want to badmouth anybody here. I just don't think we were necessarily right for each other. And also, I was far too into Teal for me to be functional in that relationship as well. I'd taken on this way of seeing the world that was sort of self-focused and self-serving. And there's a lot of that, I think. There's a lot of that in Teal's map of reality as well. It all seems very self-centered to me now, looking back on it. And then there was the shadow work, which I would try and rope people into all the time. And usually they said no, thankfully. thankfully, but that didn't stop me doing it on my own. And I can't say it helped, really. I don't think it was a good thing at any point for me. All I've really got to show for it are relationships which either ended, or people that I alienated, which of course wasn't just to do with the Teal thing. I definitely started alienating people before that, but that didn't stop with the Teal thing. Or relationships that took years to repair. I also got that to show for me doing the shadow work, not necessarily trying to get people to do the shadow work causing that, but the consequences of me doing the shadow work meant that, for example, I didn't talk to my dad for a year. Just cut him out of my life. It wasn't his fault, no reason for that, really. It was my way of perceiving things in my life, and it was my way of processing the information that I was coming to, and also shadow work, all through shadow work, really, that kind of caused that. And so, yeah, I didn't talk to him for a year. I regret that now, and we've rebuilt our relationship, and things are better now than they were. But yeah, it was not good. Also, another thing I got out of doing shadow work and the whole Teal thing, I feel, is anxiety, which I didn't really have to deal with before that in a great way. I was definitely depressed. You know, it might have come about anyway, but it really came on when I was going through the whole Teal thing. And it's still something that I deal with now, which is great. When I left the flat and the relationship, I had intended to travel about and sort of work over the internet, which, similar to my YouTube plan before, might have worked if I'd known what I was doing, if I had an actual plan, or maybe some like genuinely marketable skills at the time, or a view of my own worth that wasn't, you know, overinflated by the law of attraction and ideas like this. As it stood, I expected that the universe would provide and that everything would be just fine, right? I mean, I thought I was fucking God's gift at the time. It wasn't until months later that the reality of the choices I made would crash down pretty fucking hard on me. But in the meantime, I lived in this super wonderful, amazing, magical fantasy land where I could order things on Amazon, but like for your mind, even if they never really actually arrived. And everything that happened to me was this wonderful, amazing synchronicity. So come April 2014, I was attending a Teal workshop in London. And because I'd moved out of the flat and had decided that the universe was going to take me wherever I needed to be, I had no home and I had about 20 quid to my name. My ticket to the workshop was generously paid for by fellow Tealers, and during my stay in London, I was sleeping on floors kindly offered to me by friends I'd made in the group. In the days that followed the workshop, I actually spent a small amount of time in a small group with Blake and Graciela, which is two of Teal's inner circle members. I also travelled to Stonehenge and to Glastonbury with a few fellow Tealers. I returned to my mum's sofa shortly after that, where I slept for a little while before moving into her utility room because there really wasn't much space for me and I was becoming more and more reclusive. And during that time, I met the person who I would eventually marry. I also moved halfway around the world and lost my faith entirely. But that's another story for another time. And I've got plenty more pictures and videos also to share for that part of the story. If you enjoyed this video today, which is really a part 1 of this story, then hit like and then stick a comment below and let me know that you want to see part 2. And if you've made it to the end of this video, then say mango in the comments so that people anyone who hasn't got to the end of this video will be incredibly confused by everybody who's saying mango in the comments. If you want to see part 2, then make sure you subscribe to the channel as well and hit the little bell and all so you get notified anytime I upload a video. I'm Andy Fellows and I'm here pretty much every Thursday. Please be kind and ask good questions, and I will see you in the next one.